Well, good morning, everybody out there. Thank you to everybody who is attending today, and we look forward to talking about Fabric from Microsoft. And so we're going to share some screens here and have our friend Sarah talk all about Forvis Mazars. So let's get that going, and away we go, Sarah.
Thank you, Charles. And yes, thank you for attending our webinar, Weave a Data Tapestry with Microsoft Fabric. So a little about Forvis Mazars or Forvis Mazar. We are an independent member of Forvis Mazars Global, a leading global professional services network ranked among the largest public accounting firms in the United States. Our team members are dedicated to providing an unmatched client experience through the delivery of assurance, tax, and consulting services for clients in all 50 states and internationally. As part of the firm's consulting services, Business Technology Services provides analysis, design, implementation, upgrade, training, and support services for accounting and ERP systems and sales and marketing CRM systems. Our end-to-end solutions can help clients achieve their digital transformation goals. At a glance, these are the technologies Business Technology Services supports. Today, we're going to be focusing on Microsoft Fabric, which encompasses Power BI. And you got to see a glimpse of Charles. So Charles is our presenter today. He is a senior managing consultant at Forvis Mazars and has more than 30 years of experience. In his experience, Charles has worked with a variety of industries and solutions. He implements, trains, and supports analytical, reporting, and planning solutions, including Solver Extended XFP&A, SQL Server Reporting Services, and Power BI. As a frequent contributor and speaker, Charles can be found on Forvis Mazars Foresights, LinkedIn, and at conferences such as Solver Ascend and Dynamics Communities. Again, thank you for participating in today's webinar. Now I will turn over the presentation to Charles.
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. And again, thank you to everybody who is here today. We are going to talk all about this thing called Microsoft Fabric. And it's quite a big thing. And it's something that you may have already been using part of, but we're going to talk about how it all kind of works together. So let's talk about what the objectives of our webinar are. Why are we here? So we're going to talk about the purpose of Microsoft Fabric. What is it, right? What is the difference between Power BI and Fabric, or how do they relate to each other? And then we'll talk about the components of this data analytics platform called Fabric. So if you're here to learn about payroll or other types of topics, you may be in the wrong place. But this is what we're going to talk about in this next 60 minutes. All right. So let's talk about what is Fabric. Now, for those of you who have attended previous webinars, you know that we have a few polling questions, and we have one coming up right now. So get ready, and here we go. Where is your data stored? So there's so many. We could have had a lot of choices on this, but we went with just a few. But go ahead and take a gander at this, and let's see what everybody selects. And so if you also have attended other webinars, sometimes we like to pull out some cultural references. So today, by the way, in history, Presidents Kennedy and Nixon, of course, before they were both president, squared off for the first time on TV in a debate. So there's your Today in History lesson. So everybody take a moment to get this question answered, and we will move forward. I could have said something like, what's your favorite fabric? So, but going more technology. But I'll go with cotton. Nothing like cotton. All right. So the answer is, looks like 40% of you guys said A and B, which made sense. And then some of you said other, or I don't know. And then 32% said source system and 12 said Excel. So, of course, can we live without Excel today? All right. So let's talk about what fabric is. Now, fabric is really a collection of things. It's not a product per se. It's a collection of functionality, some of which you probably may already be using. So the idea is this is a platform for doing data. It's a data analytics platform. And pretty much probably everybody on this call or this webinar analyzes data, right? Now you may export data to a spreadsheet. You may be using Power BI. You may just be printing reports. But if you are doing that and you're looking at data and trying to make sense of it to help guide your decisions, then you are doing data analysis. And that's what the purpose of Fabric is to help you do analysis. Now, historically, Microsoft has had several products that you can use. And now what they've done is they've taken those products and they've combined them into this all-in-one deal called Fabric. But it's really, you still have those apps within Fabric that we're going to look at here shortly. So think of Fabric as a suite of services that you can use. You can use one of them, you can use all of them, or somewhere in between. And of course, because it's in the cloud, it is software as a service. So it is a SaaS product from Microsoft to help you perform data analysis. Okay. Now, what is in Fabric, or what kind of functionality is there? So what it's going to help you do are those things in blue. So it's going to help you move data. A lot of people have data in various systems. You have your ERP data, you have payroll data and somewhere else. You may have data in spreadsheets. And so that data movement is going to allow you to move that data around so that you can then work with it. It's going to help you process and ingest that data. So take your raw data and ingest it into like a warehouse, for example. But make sure you get good data. Otherwise, your data warehouse is going to get an upset stomach. Right? Couldn't let that one go. Transformation is a very big thing because more often than not, the data that you have is not in the format that you need it to be to do analysis. So being able to transform that data so that you can actually use it is a key thing. Real-time event routing. So, if you've got all this data, and imagine you've got either hundreds of thousands, but probably millions and maybe hundreds of millions of records, you want to know what's going on a lot of times in a real-time manner. And so our Fabric has that real-time event routing. And then lastly, you got all this data that you've been moving around and transforming and putting into a final form. Now it's time to actually build reports using that data. And that's that report building piece that we're going to talk about. All right. So you got all these elements that are part of Fabric. So what is in Fabric? Well, you have data engineering, data factory, and we're going to go through these one at a time here in a moment. So those are the areas of data that we're going to be able to work with. Okay. So Power BI, Azure Synapse Analytics, Azure Data Factory, and others. You may have heard about all of these pieces separately. Certainly Power BI. A lot of you probably heard of Power BI, even though you may not have used Azure. But what Microsoft has now done is they've said, let's take this data or these pieces and put them together in this one package called Fabric. Okay. And so you can still just use Power BI. You can still just use Azure Synapse Analytics. You can still just use Data Factory and then the others that are out there. But now they're all part of this thing called Fabric, this suite of services called Fabric. Okay, so I've got a slide coming up that's going to kind of roll all this down into really one sentence for you. But before we do that, we have our second polling question. So get ready, and here we go. Now, if anybody gets this question wrong, I'm gonna be mad. But go ahead and take a moment to answer. Fabric contains multiple components, including Power BI.
Can we leak the answer? Get 100%.
Let's just see what we get here. So while we're waiting, of course, a lot of you, if you haven't used Power BI and some of these other services, I mean, really good services, good products, of course. And if you're a Microsoft house, then most likely you are going to use these. Perhaps we have a lot of companies who want to take, for example, financial reporting and put it into Power BI, or of course, other types of reporting. But we're seeing a lot of people do that. And we had a webinar a couple of years ago, I think, maybe just last summer, about creating financial reports in Power BI. So if that's something that interests you, go check it out and ask us about it. We'll send you a link to it. All right, so 93.6% said true. So not to talk to those folks of you who said false or I don't know, but the answer is true. All right. So what is, excuse me, what is in Microsoft Fabric? Well, you got all of those items. So let's talk about what those are. And by the way, we are going to have a demo here in our webinar. So get through these slides and then we'll show you some product. But let's start from the left here. So Data Factory. What that is a way to integrate your data from various sources. So if you've got, for example, spreadsheets, or let's say all your data is sitting in a ERP system, and you want to take all that data and you want to put it in the cloud, okay? And you want to be able to report on it from the cloud. So Factory is going to enable you to connect to that raw data or that source data and pull it into the cloud. But we talked about transforming the data earlier. So a lot of you, if you are today importing data into Excel from, let's say, a text file or something, you may have gone through the experience where it opens up Power Query, where you can do transformations. You're going to have the ability to do that in Data Factory as well. And there are some other choices there to get the data in. But Data Factory is that tool or that functionality that says, give me your data and let me pull it in to our data warehouse. There are 200 connectors that you can use, over 200 connectors you can use. So that's a lot of source data that's available, okay? If you want to know more, if you downloaded the presentation, you'll have the notes. But you can go to, if you search what is Data Factory in Microsoft Fabric, you'll get all the information that you can hope for and more. Data engineering. Now, that's something that a lot of us don't really get into, but data engineering allows you to really work with tons of data. That's a technical term, tons. But if you've got huge amounts, right? If you're a mom and pop store, you're not going to be using data engineering most likely. If you are Sears, or maybe not Sears, let's pick somebody else. We'll say Buc-ee's, which is the big rush stop area, mostly in the South. But Buc-ee's, we got a lot of stores, so they're going to have a lot of point of sale data. And so they could use data engineering to pull that data and work with it, okay? So the whole idea, again, with data engineering is to help you create optimized infrastructures for handling large amounts of data, all right? Now, data warehouse. Well, you got to have a place to put all this data. So the data warehouse is going to give you the ability to do that. Now, there are different types of data warehouses, and there's lake houses, there's warehouses, and you can see here on the slide, it's all sitting on this single data foundation called OneLake. But when we get into that, you're going to see that you have some choices there about what type of data warehouse you want to use. But again, the whole idea is all of this sits in the cloud in this one platform. So you're pulling data from point A, you're putting into a data warehouse, which is point B, and you're going to report against that data warehouse. So that data warehouse is where all that data that you're pulling in is going to reside. Okay. Data science, again, that's going to be if you are trying, well, I'm sorry, not again. That is going to be where you are integrating with Azure learning, machine learning, where you can do all sorts of experiments and models and things like that, and then build predictions of your data against your data. So if you really want to build those learning models and use AI and all that sort of good stuff, that is data science. We talked in an earlier slide about real-time event tracking. So real-time intelligence is a way for you to be alerted, basically, to situations. So you can get insights, you can visualize the data, you can take action on the data, and all that can be done in real time by the system tracking your data. And you can build, of course, what you want those real-time events to be. There's actually a real-time hub there where you can create connectors to your data and then pull all that together. So again, real-time intelligence, it's not like getting a KPI per se, like you're used to, like, hey, my inventory is too low. It's a lot more than that. It's really, again, to track, hey, what's going on with my data? Show me my data logs of the data that's been coming in, the streaming of that data coming in, and then really just managing and being alerted to what's happening with your data. Now, of course, a lot of you are familiar with Power BI, but if you haven't used it yet, Power BI really is a visualization tool. So it's not like a report writer per se, although they do have what they call Power BI Report Builder, which is separate from the desktop experience that we're used to. And that one is more akin to a traditional report experience. Whereas what we normally think of as Power BI is the desktop where we can build visualizations, right? Bar charts and column charts and pie charts and all that sort of good stuff, okay? And so Power BI is going to be connecting to that data warehouse and taking advantage of the work that you have done using Data Factory, data engineering, and data science to create this really well-constructed data environment. And then Power BI is just there saying, okay, you got all the data. Now it's time to report on it, right? Because the whole purpose of having data is so you can get reporting. And that's Power BI.
Charles.
Yeah.
Sorry, we have a related question from Daniel. What are the difference? Yeah, so what are the differences in Power BI between Office 365 and Microsoft Fabric?
Let's see. So Power BI is, I think, Daniel, I believe Power BI in your question is how you get to Power BI and how you license it. It's the same product. So there's only one Power BI, but it's how you license it. And now, in fact, if you go to the app.powerbi.com website, it's actually going to want you to use Fabric, or it's going to want you to create a Fabric subscription. Instead of in the previous, you would actually just do a Power BI subscription. So now Power BI is part of Fabric. Right. And then last but not least, Data Activator. So this is a way to get things like email notifications and Power Automate workflows when your data is changing. So for example, if you said, hey, I'm not, I want to be alerted when sales in Omaha start going up. So you can use things like Power Automate to send out alerts or send out reports when things happen. So it's all about activating your data. Okay. So there's a lot to these. I'm giving you thumbnail sketches on these guys, but there's a lot to them, of course. Okay. All right. And we do have a question. How well does this work if your data warehouse are on another platform like Snowflake? So what it can do is, with those 200 connectors in the data warehouse and data factory, we can pull in data from other sources like Snowflake as a product name. And so when we get into data factory here shortly, we'll take a look at that, Tristan. Thank you. All right. So how do we get into Fabric? Well, there's your website right there. That's how you get to it, app.fabric.microsoft.com/home. But if you just go to app.powerbi.com, it's going to want you to go, basically you're going to get the same functionality as you would if you go here. And so if you just start with that, it'll just take you right to this screen. All right, so app.fabric.microsoft.com. All right, and then you can see you've got the blocks or the tiles for the various pieces of functionality. So Data Activator, as we saw earlier, okay, you can see you've got a lot of choices here. And that's just the Data Activator, which is the thing that we talked about at the end. So here we can do a lot of different things. As you can see, there's event analytics, data analytics using SQL. You can build your own task flows. So we're not going to read every slide because we want to save time for the demo. Data Factory. See, it's a little bit different. If I go back one, there you go. It says Data Activator right there. And you can see we got a lot of stuff having to do with Activator. Whereas we go to the next one, now we're talking about Data Factory. And that's, again, the tool that we use to connect to our source data and pull it into our warehouse. And then we have data engineering. So that's for the really smart people who are going to make sure that all this vast amount of data, these millions and billions of records, are going to be set up in a structure that makes sense and it can scale and can handle all that data. And then we have data science, okay? And then the data warehouse and Power BI. And look at there, there's your humble presenter right there. All right. And then last but not least, real-time intelligence. You can see they all look a lot, they all look very similar, but there are some differences between them. So here you go. Here's that sentence that I mentioned earlier. So I found this on this video, and I think it worked well. So it says Power BI and Fabric are like Excel and Office 365. So Daniel asked about 365 actually as well. But just think of Power BI as a piece of the puzzle now. It's not just a destination, it's part of a destination. Just like in Office 365, you have Excel, Word, PowerPoint, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So Power BI is part of Fabric, as Excel is part of Office 365. Okay? Here is our third polling question. So what do I, a long-time Power BI user, need to do to transition? Okay. Take a moment to answer that, and then we're going to actually get into a demo here in a moment. Now, again, you can use the Power BI desktop, for example, for free. You can go download it today, you can use it, and the money starts when you are wanting to share, and you want to share it in this SaaS environment. So if you want to upload it to the Power BI service, then you will then have subscriptions for your users. Okay. And let's see where we are on our questions, on our answers. All right. So 35% said purchase a subscription, and 48% said nothing. It's already part of it. So yeah, if you already have Power BI, a subscription to Power BI, then you can just keep logging into it. Okay. Now Scott says, can I use Fabric for continuous monitoring and controlled testing and Power BI for reporting? So Fabric, so Power BI is part of it. So yeah, so definitely you can use Fabric for that monitoring, and then Power BI as part of Fabric can then be used for reporting. Okay, so it's not. Don't think of it as either or. Think of it as just different. Think of Fabric as the overall umbrella, and then Power BI is one of those pieces that fit under that umbrella. So yeah, so you can definitely use Fabric for the monitoring, and such as with real-time intelligence, for example, and then use Power BI to do the reporting against your data. Great question. All right, so let's talk about the Fabric experience. So there's your website. So if you're playing at home, you can go to app.fabric.microsoft.com. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new browser over here. And let's just do that. app.fabric.microsoft.com. There it is. And there's the Fabric logo right there, a little icon. Then we're going to log in. And there it is. Just like the screenshots earlier, now we are in Fabric. Okay. Now I'm just using a trial, so I've got everything as part of it. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So we're going to talk about showing some items here. So data factory, data warehouse, Power BI. Okay, so from a data warehouse perspective, you have some choices. As we said earlier, everything sits on this one lake experience. And so you can see that it is data lake based. So a data warehouse, you have two choices. You have data warehouse, you have a lake house. Well, what's the difference? So a data warehouse is used when you have semi-structured or very structured data. Okay, think of accounting data as very structured, right? You have rows and you have columns, and those are inside tables. So if you're looking to take your accounting data and pull it in, you're most likely going to be using a data warehouse for that purpose. Now, there is also the ability to handle some semi-structured data, um, as opposed to just having 100% rows and columns. But when you want it all nice and structured, that's where the data warehouse is going to come in. Now, it is an open format. There's minimal, quote unquote, minimal setup. Of course, you still have to set it up, and you have to have the people who understand how to set up a data warehouse to set it up in an optimized way. I'm going to show you when we go in there where you can just start importing data and building tables on the fly. But I'm not a proponent of that process. I really prefer that before you start pulling in data or ingesting data, that you think about what your reports are going to be and how the data should be structured to support those reports. All right. You don't want to just have a bunch of stuff without any good structure, because it's not going to help you as you keep adding data. And think of like if you exported a report today to Excel and you just had one spreadsheet with a whole bunch of columns on it, and you had a lot of repeating values because the customer name is the same. Every time the customer code is ABC, it's the same customer name. Every time the product is XYZ, it's the same product description. And there's a lot of information that would be repeating. And typically in database world, we don't like repeating data. We like to move that out into dimensional tables. So when you're building a data warehouse, you want to come up with a structure that's going to be very well supported and be able to handle a lot of data and be fast. That's the key, right? Because if we can build reports, you don't want to sit around. You want them to be quick. And by creating this optimized structure, it's going to help you have faster reports. All right, so data warehouse, structured data, and then a lakehouse is going to be used a lot for unstructured data, like getting a bunch of emails, and you want to manage your emails or other types of data. You can still have structured data, but it's really meant in a way where it can handle a large amount of unstructured information. Okay. Again, structured would be like your accounting data. Unstructured would be like emails and pictures and a bunch of other stuff that you want to track in the web. Okay. And Microsoft refers to this as a lightweight data warehouse. And you have the option, you can use SQL tools like you're used to doing with SQL Server. So it's just a way of how you structure that information. And so we're going to use a data warehouse in our example, but you'll see how that looks. All right, now for loading the data, we're using Data Factory. And you'll see data integration can be used very similar to SQL Server integration services. I love SQL integration services. But SSIS, as the acronym is, comes from the on-premise world. And now we're in the cloud. So we're going to call it Data Factory. Okay. And so you have two different ways. You have data flows and data pipelines. Okay. So you're going to see it, what that looks like here. And then last but not least, we've ingested the data. We've got the data in the warehouse. Now we need to report on that data, and we're going to use Power BI. Now, Power BI, you've got the desktop, which I mentioned earlier. That's where you typically do all your report creation. You've got Report Builder, which is that additional reporting tool that works with Power BI and allows you to create what are called paginated reports. Paginated meaning they can go over one page, okay? And they're meant to handle reports that can cover multiple pages. Also, if you're looking for reports with headers and footers, totals, and all that sort of good stuff, that's what Report Builder is best for, right? And then the service. So that's sitting inside of the data of the fabric. So look at there, here we go. So let's go take a look. So we're gonna go over here. I've already got this open, okay? Now you'll notice down here, I've got data warehouse. Okay? And if I click on that, then I can go to any one of these other choices, okay? So let's say I wanna go to data factory, okay? Now you'll notice we have a few choices here. We have data flows, we have data pipelines, we have Azure Data Factory, and a few other items. As you can see, these all say preview, okay? But I'm just gonna start this. I've already done it because we run into problems. We wanna have it already set up. But if I go under Data Flow Gen 2, now, if you've imported data into Power BI or into Excel, this screen is going to look really familiar to you. Okay, it's the same Power Query, and you can see right up on the screen it says Power Query. So I can just go to Import from Excel, for example, and I'm going to upload a file and hit Browse. Okay, and then let's go here and let's go to Fabric and Sales Data. All right, so it's pulling in my file, and then I'll hit Next. All right, there we go. Now we have our tables that's part of that data. Now, of course, the good thing with tools like a data warehouse and Power BI is that you can pull data from different sources. So for your live situation, you might say, well, I want to create this data pipeline to a payroll system, and I want this to come from ERP, and I want this to come from Excel. So you may have different pipelines or data factory processes that are going to be pulling from all those various sources, pulling them into one place. But as we mark these items, we have the same ability to transform this data as you typically do. Again, it's the same product, so we're not losing anything here. And of course, it's taken a while because we're in a demo. We want it to be faster, but there we go. So now here I can come over and I can look at each one of these. And this is just a preview. Once you preview it, then you would hit Create. So if I hit Create, now I can come over here, and this is where all my transformations. Now this is if you're doing it through the first option that we chose. The data pipeline is a different way of doing it, okay? So here I could, for example, go to Choose Columns, and I can unselect the ones I don't want, and then just pick the ones I do, like that, and then hit OK. All right, now down here, data destination. We obviously need a place to put all this stuff. Okay, so if I come over here and hit the plus sign, look at these choices. I can go to a lake house, I can go to a warehouse, I can go to Azure SQL. And so you've got all these choices. And this is where I said earlier, you really don't want to have to think about this on the fly, right? You want it to be already available. So typically, yeah, we want to put it into a warehouse, for example, in this case, but I want it to go into one that I already have. Okay, so I already have one, but I could create a brand new one if I wanted to from here. Okay, I'm not going to do that because I already have the data. But basically, at this point, I've got my data. I can come in here and create calculated columns. I can transform the data. I can limit the data. I can do all sorts of stuff. Again, this is all stuff that you may already be doing today in Excel and Power BI. Okay? So once you do all that, then you can publish that. Now, since I've already got that, let's go ahead and go back to here. I'm going to go to my workspace. And let's close this. Yes. So let's go back to my workspace. And so you see all these items here that I've been playing with. Okay. So if we go down here to sales, for example, you can see I've got a little warehouse right there. And then there's my data here. We do have a question. If we are pulling from Excel and there's a new spreadsheet for monthly data, do we have to do a manual upload? No, you don't have to do a manual. You can set it up to automatically pull that data. Okay, good question. All right, so if I come over here, you notice, now one thing I want you to think about here, especially when we get to Power BI, is what we call a semantic model. Because the whole point, the whole way to create Power BI reports is by having a data model. So the data model determines how do all these tables relate to each other. So I've got customers, I've got items, and I've got sales data. So how do those three tables join together? Okay, and that is called a semantic model. And the cool thing is when you pull this data in, it can build a semantic model automatically for you, and you can also modify or create your own. So if I come over here, notice that semantic model. I can go, for example, to settings. I can go to explore. So if we go ahead and explore, it's going to show me those columns. So this is in preview and it's running a little bit slow. So I'm not going to let it just sit here and count off. And there we go. So then we have customers, items, and sales line items. So you can actually preview the data here. And this is a feature that's available, that's been in Power BI for a little while. But I can come over here and I can say, for example, customer. And now I'm building my data. So now I'm going to pull in extended price as a value. And look at there. So now think of what we've done so far. We took data from Excel or from a source data system. We pulled it into Fabric, into a data warehouse using Power Query. And now we are able to preview the data right here and make sure that the data is what we want. Okay, and what we're expecting it to be. So that's pretty cool. So let's close that. I'm going to say that because I already have that. If we come back here and click on this, here you can see I've got a sample report, I've got my data flow, and I've got my data warehouse. So we've got all these pieces that are coming together to build out what we want to use for reporting. So if I come over here to, I'm not going to go to that yet. I'm going to show that to you in a little bit. So here's our data warehouse. If we click on sales, then you can see I've got my default semantic model. I've got another one that I created called data mark test. Okay. Here's my SQL connection string. So if you want to query this data externally, you can do that using that string. Okay. And then there you go. I mean, it's really cool, and it just did all that automatically. You didn't have to do anything special, really. So now I come over here. You can set security. You can build a report. You can go to paginated report, which is report builder, and then we can go to settings again. Now, if we look at this create a report, look at that. We're in Power BI, okay, and we have our tables. So I'm going to show you in Power BI Desktop in a moment as well. But if we go back here, if you click back on my workspace, okay, and if I go down to sales, There it is. So that's our warehouse. Tick, 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 tick. Just waiting on fabric. Okay, so now, looky here. Now we are, for those of you who are SQL Server people or database people, notice we have, just like you normally would see, you have tables, you have views, you have functions, you have stored procedures. So you can do all this SQL work that you're used to doing on premise in the cloud. If we come over here to our customers, we can click on it. It's going to show us our data. We can build queries against that data. I mean, all that stuff. And we can also download this as a SQL database project if you're like using Visual Studio, for example. Okay. So all these Microsoft tools just kind of work together. It's an amazing, isn't it? All right. So now let's go into Power BI desktop. So I'm going to pull up that guy. And here's Power BI desktop. Now, I don't have any data loaded right now. So look, there's no wires, no nothing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Get Data, and come down here to More, and there's Fabric, and then we have all these choices. So I'm going to just go to Warehouses. And in a moment, it's going to show me, there we are. So here's all the stuff that I've got out there. I'm going to go ahead and choose Sales. Now, normally in Power BI desktop, when you're loading in data, right, it's going to show you the data on the right, which it's going to do, and then you can go view your data model. Let's go ahead and hit connect. So it's connecting to our warehouse. It's working on it. And there it is. So boom, now it's connected to my data. And here's my information. Now, the one thing that you're used to be able to do in desktop is go look at your query, right? You go into Power Query. But notice what happens here. I don't have that option. I can't go into Power Query. Where do I go if I want to go to Power Query? I go back to the Fabric in the cloud, and I do it there, okay? If I go over here to my data model, there's my data model. Now notice the icons. You can see it's coming from a SQL Server Analysis Services. It's coming from a table called Sales Line Items, and it's a database, okay? And it's showing me the joins between these items. So if I said, you know what, I need to add another table, or I need to, well, yeah, I need another table. I want to join a date table, for example. Then I would go back in the cloud. I would go add that, and then I would, I could have it as part of my model. Okay, so you do the work in the cloud and you connect to it from Power BI Desktop. Then you can build a report. I think I've got one already somewhere. There we go, Fabric sample. But no big deal here. All we're going to do, we'll come over here and create a matrix. Open up that, make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Thinking. There we go. Too many things going on. There we go. There's the one that I done earlier. This is the same thing I was just going to do. So if we come over here, for example, I can start dragging stuff in. So I want to look at things by class. And I'm going to look at items by class, item class right there. And I'm going to pull in my price right there. And there it is. So just like that, we took data from Excel. We loaded it into a data warehouse in the cloud. We created a semantic model, which is what you see when you go over here, right there, how all the tables join together. We connected to it in Power BI, and now we built a report. And then the last thing we would do, of course, is we would publish this back into the cloud so that all of our users could share the report. So pretty cool, right? Hopefully everybody says that. So Scott has a couple of messages. Says, can you build a canned set of data for one purpose, another for something else? And So yeah, I mean, so Scott, for sure, you can create as many sets of data as you want, right? It's all about the money. But as long as if you got that warehouse, you can build, for example, a sales warehouse, a payroll warehouse, a general ledger warehouse, all these different specific data. And then there's also data marts, Scott. So don't forget about data marts as well, which is part of this. All right. So great. All right. So now let's go back. Let's see. So we have all this. So again, we can hit publish. Save our changes. And let's give it a name. Call this webinar. And we're going to save it. Let's see. Let's put it here. Excuse me. Actually, it's go there. All right, so it's publishing. And then once it finishes publishing, we'll go view it. There we go. And here we are. So we've gone from Excel, used Data Factory to pull in the data, pull it into a data warehouse, which we can then manage using the data warehouse functionality. Then we pull that data into Power BI, built a report, publish it to the web, and now we're in basically Power BI functionality now. So we have all these pieces of functionality working together rather than having to go into separate different tools. Now they're all just part of Fabric. Okay. All right. So we have a few questions coming in. So Kenneth asked, for example, if you have data from CRM, for example, and the data is already structured, is there a need to pull it into a data warehouse? Well, you could just connect Power BI to it, for example, if that's what you're trying to do. So the whole idea here is if you want to put into a data warehouse, rather than just connecting directly from Power BI to it, then that's what you can do. But you don't necessarily have to build a data warehouse to use Power BI, for example. Okay. So if you go back to Power BI, got it. I can still come over here. Well, I can't do it now because I've already attached this one. But if we go here and here we go, blank report. Looking for file new for some reason. But if I go here, you still have all those connectors that you're used to. So the idea is if you wanted to put things into a central warehouse, you can. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that because you still have all these choices right here. So if I come over to more, and let's say CRM, well, that's that one. So let's see. There we go. So there's 365, for example. So you have all these choices that you can use just in native Power BI. Okay. All right. Good question. So Daniel is asking manually, automatic, scheduled. So Daniel, I presume you're talking about pulling in data. Definitely it can be manually done. It can do automatic and you can schedule it. All right. I'm getting prompted to poll you for the fourth polling question. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. And there we go. All right, here's our last polling question. I'm not going to see the answer immediately, but please, I encourage everybody here to fill out the survey, if you would, afterwards. It's not going to pop up automatically. You have to go do it. But if you would, and put in comments what you want to see and some, what topics are of interest to you. We could do a whole series on each one of these things and spend hours on each one if we wanted to, right? And we do have webinars, for example, on Power BI. And we had a 3-part series last year, or maybe it's this year. I'm losing track of time. But January, February, March, we did a 3-part series about Power BI. But we can certainly create more about these other topics too. Okay, and Forvis Mazars does have an entire data analytics team that can help you with all of this information, okay? And then help you create reports. Okay, let's see what we got here. So we do have questions, and we do have a lot of people with questions still. Let's see. So Alina asked, will reports from the lake house source take more time and energy to build? Well, of course, it depends, Alina, on the data, the specific situation. The fact that it's in a lake house per se, I don't believe it's going to take any more time than a data warehouse. But depending on how your data is structured in that data lake house, then it could take more time. But if you're dealing with a lot of unstructured data and you need to structure it or pull it in for reporting, it can take you a bit more time to build out that lake house. But then once it's built out, then the reporting, of course, is connecting to it and then retrieving it. And then we have Alina says, thanks. And then we had somebody else said, how is data refreshed in the warehouse or lake house? So that's going to be part of your data factory where you can set up automatic jobs. Okay. And if you like more, Daniel, about that, just send me a message and I can feed you some more information about that. Okay. All right, well, it's 9:59, so we've breezed through this fabric topic, and again, we could spend hours and days talking about this, but I want to thank everybody who's attended and invite you to a future webinar, and I'll turn it over to Sarah.
That is it. Yeah, we are good to wrap up. That was super helpful today, Charles. Thank you.